There's something strange about realizing you've become background noise in your own life. My name is Harlan, and if I'm honest, I didn't see it coming. I wasn't naive, at least I didn't think I was. I just believed in her. That was my first mistake. It happened on a Saturday. Not a special Saturday, not our anniversary, not a birthday, not a holiday. Just a regular, unassuming, almost boring Saturday. But sometimes it's the quiet days that change everything. The ones that sneak up behind you while you're focused on the coffee in your hand. She'd invited me to this community benefit dance. Said it was for her work. They were raising funds for local artists, and her nonprofit was helping organize it. I'd never been to something like that before. I wasn't the dancing type. But I said yes, because I loved her, and it had been weeks since we'd done anything together that didn't involve laundry or checking emails on the couch. She wore this pale blue dress. The kind that catches light in soft ways and makes you forget how to breathe for a second. I remember staring at her before we left and thinking, she still takes my breath away. Funny how love can blind you even when your eyes are wide open. We arrived at the venue, a repurposed train station turned arts hall, and it was beautiful. Warm lights overhead, the smell of lavender and agewood, soft music floating through the air like it had nowhere better to be. And for a while, I just watched her move through the crowd, laughing with coworkers, thanking donors, smiling politely at the volunteers. She was glowing. And I was standing off to the side, holding her coat. At some point, I felt someone brush past me. A man, maybe a few years younger than me. Clean-cut, confident, familiar with her. I saw it right away in the way he leaned in, the way her hand touched his forearm like they were picking up mid-conversation. Then he extended a hand, and she took it. The next moment is hard to explain. They moved to the center of the room. The lights dimmed a bit. A slow jazz song began, and I watched as a guest, a stranger, a ghost, while my wife, the woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, swayed with another man like I was never there. Not out of spite, not in anger, but with a grace so natural it didn't even look like betrayal. It looked like she belonged there, and I didn't. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't rush over or demand an explanation. I just stood there, surrounded by voices I couldn't hear, music that suddenly felt far away, and a version of my life I didn't recognize. And that was the first time in my adult life I felt truly alone, while standing in a room full of people. She caught my eyes once. Just once. Mid-spin, mid-laugh. Her smile faltered, only slightly, as if she'd forgotten I came with her. And then she turned away. That's when it happened. I placed her coat on the empty chair. I straightened my sleeves. I walked out of that hall into the cold night air, my breath catching in the winter breeze, and I didn't look back. Not out of pride, not out of anger, but because for the first time, I realized I deserved more than being invisible. I didn't go far that night. Just 3 blocks. There was an old bench across from a shuttered bakery, the kind of spot you never notice unless you're walking without purpose. I sat there, tie loosened, hands tucked into my coat, watching condensation rise from my breath like ghosts escaping my lungs. My phone buzzed once. Then again. I didn't look. I knew it was her. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to answer. What would I say anyway? That I saw her float across that room with someone else? That I stood under the same roof as her and felt less than the furniture? No. I wasn't ready for that conversation. I didn't even know if there was a conversation to be had. Instead, I just sat in the quiet and listened to things I'd been ignoring for too long. Like the sound of my own thoughts. They were steady at first, logical, almost mechanical. Maybe it was just a dance. Maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe you're tired. Maybe it's the wine. But the deeper I sank into that bench, the less those excuses held weight. Because deep down, I'd heard her laugh before she turned around. And it wasn't the laugh she gave me. It was lighter. Freer. The kind of sound that came from someone who wasn't worried about being watched. Then came the worst thought of all, a quiet, terrible whisper that felt like it had always been there, just waiting for me to slow down enough to hear it. This isn't new, Harlan. This isn't the first time she left you standing still. And it wasn't. Not really. There were other moments. So many, scattered over the years like broken glass on carpet, invisible until you stepped the wrong way. I thought of the time she forgot my birthday 2 years ago but remembered to send a gift to her friend's cat. Or the night she came home wearing perfume I hadn't smelled in months and claimed it was from a tester in a store. I remembered dinners where she scrolled through her phone while I talked about my day. I remembered how often I had to ask for a simple touch. A kiss. Her eyes. And I remembered how easily I let it all slide because I didn't want to be a burden. Because I was raised to think that patience was love. That sacrifice meant strength. That being the stable one was the most noble thing a man could be. But sitting on that bench, I felt none of those things. Just small. Not in a self-pitying way. Just in the sense that the world around me had outgrown the version of myself I'd been trying to hold on to. Like I was a faded photo in a frame no one dusted anymore. Eventually, the wind picked up. My fingers were numb. I stood and walked home. Alone. When I got there, the living room lights were still on. The hallway smelled like her hairspray, crisp, floral, distant. She was curled on the couch, barefoot, a blanket draped over her legs, scrolling through something on her tablet like nothing had happened. She looked up when I walked in. Not startled. Not worried. Just mildly curious. Where did you go? I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that the man who left the house with her wasn't the same man who walked back in. That I saw something tonight, not just the dance, but the distance. And that for the first time, I didn't want to close the gap anymore. I didn't want to fight for space in a life where I felt like a placeholder. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smiled softly, gently, and said the one thing that surprised even me. I just needed some air. And in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't lying. The next morning didn't begin with silence. It began with the clinking of a spoon against porcelain. I heard it from the bedroom, that tiny, rhythmic sound of Emmeline stirring sugar into her coffee. Just once. She only used one spoonful. She never stirred twice. I always noticed little things like that. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not because I was tired, I wasn't, but because I didn't know who I was going to be once I stood up. I'd always been the try-again guy, the give-it-another-day guy. But something had shifted inside me last night, and I could feel it under my skin. Not anger, not even disappointment. Just absence. The absence of hope. Like a quiet closing door I didn't remember opening. Eventually, I got up and made my way to the kitchen. She was sitting at the island, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. Her feet were bare, tucked up on the stool. Casual. Comfortable. Her hair was tied back the way she always did when she didn't plan on going out. She looked up at me like everything was normal. You slept in, she said, not unkindly. I nodded. Yeah. I made my own cup of coffee. I didn't say anything about the gala. She didn't either. There was this invisible rule between us, unspoken but sacred, that we didn't ask questions we weren't ready to answer. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was just there. Like an extra person in the room, standing right between us, watching everything we didn't say. She scrolled through her phone again. I noticed the slight smile. Not smug. Not guilty. Just distracted. And I thought, does she think I didn't notice? Or does she know that I did and think I won't bring it up? I didn't ask. I just sipped my coffee and looked out the window. There was a woman walking her dog across the street. She looked younger than us, maybe early 30s. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big and mismatched shoes. But there was something in the way she moved. Unrushed. Unapologetic. As if she had nowhere else to be, and no one she had to explain herself to. I envied her. That kind of freedom. That lightness. Emmeline's voice broke the moment. What do you want to do today? It was such an ordinary question, and maybe that's what made it hurt. Because how could today be ordinary when last night happened? How could she ask me that like we were still a we? I looked at her for a long moment, really looked. And for a second, I saw the girl I met all those years ago. The one who used to grab my hand in elevators just because. The one who left sticky notes on my dashboard with silly drawings and weird inside jokes. The one who used to ask me what I wanted to do, not because she needed to fill space, but because she wanted to fill it with me. That version of her was gone. And I'd known it for a while. But I kept pretending I didn't because I was afraid of what would happen if I said it out loud. So I answered her question the only way I could, without breaking the fragile surface we were skating on. Maybe I'll take a drive. She raised her eyebrows, like she wasn't expecting that. Where to? Nowhere in particular. She nodded slowly, then took another sip of coffee, eyes back on her phone. And just like that, the conversation was over. But in my head, a different one was beginning, one I'd been avoiding for a long time. The one where I stop asking how to fix it and start asking why I keep pretending it's not broken. There are moments in life when you expect to feel something, anger, sadness, anything, and all you feel is tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that settles behind your eyes and stays there, like fog on a windshield that never fully clears. That was me, standing in the kitchen, staring at the grocery list Emmeline had left magnetized to the fridge. Written in her quick, uneven handwriting were words like almond milk, lemons, sea salt crackers, and raspberry yogurt, low sugar. All the usual things. The comfortable things. It looked exactly like every list she'd ever made in our 6 years of marriage. But I noticed one thing that hadn't been there in weeks: Harlan's coffee. It was a tiny line, squished at the bottom, almost like an afterthought. And it confused me more than it comforted me. Because when someone dances with another man like you don't exist, do they still remember what brand of coffee you drink? Or do they write it down just in case you're still around on Saturday? I didn't take the list. I didn't go shopping. Instead, I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and let the screen creak shut behind me. I didn't drive anywhere special. Just let the road unfold. No music, no GPS, just the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing, uneven at first, then slower as the miles slipped by. And for the first time, I let myself think about what I had become. Not in a bitter way. Just honest. I had become someone who didn't ask questions because I didn't want real answers. Someone who folded laundry alone at night while she worked late again. Someone who sat on the edge of the bed every Sunday, watching her pick outfits and wondering who they were meant to impress. I have been slowly erasing myself, piece by piece. For her. For the illusion of us. But here's the thing they don't tell you. If you disappear quietly enough, no one comes looking. Not even the person you gave everything to. I ended up parked by a lake I hadn't visited in years. It was the kind of place we used to go before things got busy, before the wedding, before real life stacked itself between us like a wall of polite silences. I sat on the hood of the car and just watched the water. At some point, an older couple walked by, holding hands, barely speaking. They looked like they'd been together forever. Worn in, like good leather. And I didn't envy them. Not exactly. I just wondered what it felt like to still fit. Because somewhere along the way, Emmeline and I stopped fitting. Not in a dramatic, throw the ring kind of way. It was more like trying on an old jacket and realizing the sleeves felt shorter, the shoulders tighter. You could still wear it, sure, but it didn't feel like yours anymore. When I got home later that evening, the lights were off. She'd left a plate for me. Pasta, covered with foil. A note next to it. Didn't know when you'd be back. Hope your drive cleared your head. D. It was kind. It was thoughtful. It was her trying. But I didn't eat it. Not because I was angry. I just wasn't hungry. And maybe that's where I was now, standing in a life I wasn't hungry for anymore. That Monday, I went to the hardware store. Not because we needed anything. There was nothing broken, no project waiting. But I needed a place where no one cared who I was or who I used to be. Where I could just walk through aisles of nuts, bolts, and screws without remembering how it felt to be forgotten. I lingered in the lighting section longer than I should have. The soft glow of those hanging fixtures, warm, welcoming, made me feel oddly still, like I could pause there indefinitely and pretend I wasn't living in a house where I didn't know if I was loved anymore. When I got back, the house smelled like oranges. Emmeline must have lit one of her scented candles. She was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, sorting through photo boxes I hadn't seen in years. "Hey," she said, holding up an old Polaroid. "Remember this?" It was us, blurry and sunlit, sitting on a picnic blanket in Lincoln Park. I had a mustard stain on my shirt. She was laughing. Her hand rested on my chest like I was her favorite place to land. I nodded, but I didn't move closer. There was something surreal about watching her relive our best moments like they hadn't led here, to this polite distance, this emotional waiting room where we both pretended we weren't holding our breath. "I thought we should finally get these in albums," she said, smiling. "You know, before they fade." I should have said something, anything, but my throat felt tight. Not from sadness, not even from fear, but from that quiet understanding that some things don't fade because they were never meant to last forever. I left her there on the floor with those paper memories and went upstairs. In our bedroom, I opened the top drawer of my nightstand, the one I rarely touched, and found the folded card she wrote me 5 years ago on our anniversary. I didn't even remember saving it, but there it was, still faintly smelling of her perfume. It read, "To my favorite person to come home to." I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at those words for a long time. Because these days, she didn't come home to me. She came home to the structure we'd built, the schedule we'd agreed on, the comfort of a routine where nothing hurt too loudly. And me? I just kept showing up inside it, like a tenant who forgot when his lease ended. Later that night, she knocked softly on the bedroom door, even though it was open. "You want to watch something?" she asked. "Just us." It sounded sweet. It sounded hopeful. But for some reason, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to be with her, but because I didn't know if she meant me or the idea of us. I gave a half smile and told her maybe later. She nodded once, didn't push, and padded back down the hall. And as I lay on my side in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of the TV downstairs, I thought to myself, I miss being chosen without needing to ask for it. Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. The days had started blending together like watercolor left in the rain, faded around the edges. Still technically there, but without shape. I opened a drawer and found 3 batteries, a pen with no cap, and a movie ticket stub from last year. I don't know why I stared at that stub so long. We didn't even like the film, but for 90 minutes, we had held hands in the dark. That felt important now, somehow. Emmeline came home late again. She didn't explain why. I didn't ask. We spoke, of course, like people do. About the dishes, the neighbor's dog, a bill we forgot to pay. But it was all surface, polished and hollow. That night, I found myself folding the laundry slower than usual. Not out of laziness. I just wanted to touch something that still belonged to both of us. Her sweater smelled like rosemary and mint. Mine smelled like nothing. I held them both up, one in each hand, and realized I couldn't remember the last time our clothes shared the same drawer. I put hers in the basket, kept mine in the room. I watched a light flicker in the hallway bulb. Once, twice, then steady. Funny how even electricity tries to tell you something, if you're listening. The next morning, I made coffee. Not out of habit, out of defiance. The kind I liked. Strong. No sugar. No milk. Just truth in a cup. She passed through the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower, dressed in slate gray and silver jewelry. Her presentation outfit. She looked like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine I wouldn't buy. "Wish me luck," she said, barely turning. I hesitated. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't sure if she wanted luck from me or from anyone. "Good luck," I said anyway, with a voice that didn't sound like mine. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in the stillness, both hands on the countertop, thinking. She doesn't even take her ring off. But I can't feel it anymore. And that was the moment I knew something had changed. Not because of what she did, but because I didn't feel like chasing anymore. I didn't want to ask questions I already knew the shape of. I didn't want to decode half-smiles or polite laughter or where she really went between 6 o'clock and 7:30. I just wanted something real. Something that wouldn't vanish when the music started. That evening, the music did start. Some playlist she liked, soft, upbeat, curated like always. She danced alone in the kitchen while plating dinner. Half a step, a little spin, a hum. For a moment, I thought maybe she was thinking of me. But when she turned around, she didn't see me watching. She looked right through me and kept dancing. The house was quiet when I came home. It was a different quiet this time. The kind that doesn't feel like a peaceful pause, but more like a silence that's been waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision, or maybe just waiting for it to fall apart. I walked in and didn't even bother to take off my shoes. I left them by the door, knowing I wouldn't be here long enough to care. I hadn't been able to sit still in this house for days. Maybe weeks. The air felt different now, heavy with everything I didn't say and everything she wouldn't say. The light in the living room was dimmed low, just like it had been when we first moved in. The glow of our life together was soft and warm, back then. 100 years ago, or maybe just 5. But that light, that comfortable warmth, it wasn't the same anymore. I walked into the kitchen, half expecting to see her there. It had become a kind of ritual for me, checking if she was at the counter, chopping vegetables, laughing at something on her phone. But tonight, the room was empty. The space between the countertops felt wider, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I saw it, the open bottle of wine sitting on the counter, half finished, with 2 glasses beside it. The same 2 glasses we'd used 1,000 times. I didn't need to ask who they were for. I'd been careful not to ask. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of the answer. So much had changed. So much had shifted beneath the surface, and I'd let it slip by, pretending I didn't feel it. But in that moment, looking at those glasses, I realized that this was it. This was the final thread that connected us to the version of our life that had slipped away. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just tired. Tired of living like this. Of existing in a space where nothing felt solid, where every word I said seemed like a question that could never be answered, where even the things I used to enjoy now felt like obligations. I sat down on the couch, the same couch that had once felt like a sanctuary, where we'd watched old movies, shared half-forgotten jokes, and whispered about the future. But tonight, the couch felt like a stage, and I was playing a part one didn't know how to act anymore. I couldn't even tell you how long I sat there before she came in. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. The clock on the wall didn't matter. Time had become something that stretched and pulled, but never truly went anywhere. When she walked in, I noticed right away that she wasn't wearing her engagement ring. She hadn't taken it off before, not even when she worked late or stayed at a friend's place. But tonight, it was missing. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't need to. The silence in the room spoke louder than any question I could have asked. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice soft but distant. Not apologetic. Just factual. I nodded, watching her move around the kitchen. For a moment, I thought about the early days, the way she used to glance at me across the room, how she would always make sure my plate was fuller than hers, how she'd ask about my day as if it was the most important thing in the world. Tonight, none of that was there. The familiar routines had evaporated, leaving only a formality between us, a quiet understanding that we were both waiting for something. What, exactly? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. She brought me a plate, set it in front of me, and sat across the table. Her movements were slow, calculated. Like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing, but too tired to try and say anything right. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment. "Maybe we need a break. Just a little time apart. To clear our heads." I didn't respond immediately. My fork hovered over the food, but I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything except figure out where we had gone wrong, how we had ended up here. "Do you think that would fix it?" I asked quietly, almost surprised that the words had come out. She looked at me, then glanced down at her plate. "I don't know. Maybe. But something has to change." I set my fork down. The weight of her words, the distance in her voice, settled over me like a blanket, cold and heavy. It wasn't that I didn't understand her. It wasn't that I didn't get where she was coming from. I did. But in that moment, something clicked. Something deep inside me told me I couldn't keep pretending that this was just a rough patch. It wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like forever. And what I saw wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with. It was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had already checked out, just like I had, but in a different way. We were both there, but we were both gone. And neither of us knew how to get back. The next morning, everything felt different. Not because something drastic had changed overnight, but because I'd let go of the weight that had been hanging over me for so long. The constant questions, the exhaustion of pretending things were fine when they clearly weren't. It wasn't a grand revelation. It wasn't some dramatic conversation or breakthrough. It was just a simple realization. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest thing, but it's the most necessary. I woke up early, earlier than usual. The house was still and calm, the kind of calm that only comes when the world outside hasn't fully woken up yet. I could hear the faint sound of birds outside the window, the breeze gently tapping against the glass. It felt like nature was telling me, it's okay. It's time to breathe. I made coffee, the way I liked it, strong and black. Emmeline was still asleep, wrapped in the quiet world of her dreams. I didn't wake her. I let the morning unfold without rushing. Sitting at the kitchen table, I thought about how much I had changed. Not because of anything she had done, but because I'd finally allowed myself to step out of the fog. I had spent so much time chasing something that wasn't there, trying to fix a version of us that no longer existed. And now? Now, I felt lighter. Like I had permission to stop searching for answers in places I couldn't find them. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about finding the strength to let go, to accept that sometimes the end of one chapter is the beginning of another. Emmeline woke up a while later. She didn't ask where I'd gone last night. She didn't need to. We both knew what was happening, but there was no need to say the words. Not yet. Not when we were still learning how to breathe again. She came into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, and sat across from me. We didn't speak right away. But when she did, it wasn't the usual surface conversation. It was quieter, more meaningful. "I've been thinking too," she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. "Maybe we need to start over. Not everything, but something. Something real." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had in a long time. "I think I can live with that," I said. We spent the morning talking, not about what had gone wrong, but about what we still wanted, what we could still build. We talked about the simple things, the kind of things that get lost when you're stuck in the weeds of a relationship. "I'd like us to take a trip, somewhere quiet. Just the two of us," she said, her eyes brightening with the idea. I nodded. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a promise to fix everything. But it was enough. It was a step in the right direction. A chance to rediscover each other at our own pace, without the pressure of pretending we had all the answers. The day passed by quietly, but with a new kind of warmth. We didn't solve everything, but we didn't need to. I realized that sometimes, simply being present with each other is the most powerful thing two people can do. The tension, the distance, the silence we'd been living in for months, it started to feel less like a barrier and more like something we could break down, piece by piece. We didn't have to figure it all out at once. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt hope. Not the kind of hope that comes with fireworks or declarations, but the kind of hope that rises slowly, like the sun creeping over the horizon after a storm. Sometimes, the most important thing is the quiet moments. The ones where you don't have to speak, but just exist together. The moments where you know it's not about fixing everything all at once. It's about choosing to try again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to try again.